How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Aleph, Daf 91 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, okay, wow. Daf 91. I have a feeling this is going to be a bit of a doozy. It's Motzei Shabbos. It's 3:45 in the morning. I haven't slept yet because I had to learn this daf. If I'm babbling, this program is called Babble on Talmud because I babble on Talmud. This might be a little more babbly than usual because Mom is pulling an all-nighter. I got a chavrusa in 2 hours, and then anyways. But this is a big old daf. So we're going to talk about Tadir versus qadosh, and when Tadir is out of order. Okay, that's kind of like the first Amud, kind of, yeah, and it's going to be like, I think it's like kind of inconclusive. And then we get to a new Mishnah where we discuss oil donations, right? If a person makes an edava, donates oil, like a oil libation kind of thing, to the Beis Hamikdash. First of all, can you do it? Can't you do it? Is allowed or not? How oil donations are offered, right? What's the process of the kohen actually offering it on the mizbech? What does that look like? How much oil must be donated? Finally, how wine donations are offered. Again, like how is that actually technically offered in the mizbech? It's going to be a big old off. We even get into sugyas like davar she'einu miskavid and mitzvah she'einu tzricha legufo, which are sugyas bichlal from Shabbos, which we haven't seen in 5 years. So it's going to be a gewalt. It's going to be great, but I think it's going to be it's got to be a big old daf. Usually when it takes a huge amount of time to prepare, it's an indication it's going to be a big daf. Wow, Masechta Zevachim does not disappoint. Chaver, let's jump in to Daf Tzadi Aleph of Masechta Zevachim. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention in the introduction is that my plan is to finish today the 10th parak of Masechta Zevachim, which is pretty exciting. All right, friends, we are going to begin on Daf Tzadi Amid Beis at the Mishnah. Honestly, only about like 3/5 into the page, 2/5 up from the bottom. So there's a Mishnah about 15-20 lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadi Amid Beis. Again, just a reminder, I might be a little bit babblier than usual. Hopefully, I think I'll be able to make sense and explain the daf and everything, but no guarantees that my full sentences and all that kind of stuff. Says the Mishnah, Kol achato shebateire kodmus la'ashamos. Okay, so korban chatas is precede korban ashams is, right? We saw that in the Mishnah. I don't remember what day it was, yesterday, the day before. Korban chatas is applied to all 4 horns of the mizbeach. Explicitly the Torah talks about the shirayim being poured on the yisod of mizbeach. Chatas takes precedence over korban asham. Chutz me'asham mitzorah. However, there is one exception to this rule, and that is the asham of the mitzorah al hechsher, because the asham mitzorah is coming to enable the mitzorah to be able to offer korbanos, right? A mitzorah, right? It's got this kind of multi-staged purification process, but once it's all mamish coming to an end, he comes to the Beis Hamikdash, and he needs to bring 3 korbanos, an asham, an ola, and a chatas. Now the thing is, at the time that he's coming to the Beis Hamikdash, he's a mechusar kippurim. He's not allowed to offer korbanos at that point. He's not yet purified yet. So he brings his korban asham, and as part of this korban asham, there's a whole elaborate service. The kohen takes from the blood and he sprinkles it towards the heichel, and he takes from the blood and he puts it on the mitzorah's behonis, and then he takes oil and puts it on his behonis. So there's a whole elaborate, right? And then I don't have a chumash here, but I think it says something at the end of that process with the asham. It says, right? Maybe like it says something like v'chiper hakohen, whatever. But like at that point, he's not pure. And now, because he's gone through this whole process of the korban asham, now he can bring his korban chatas. He wasn't in a place prior to be able to be bringing a korban chatas. So normally a korban chatas would come before a korban asham. In the case of asham mitzora, however, the mitzora at this point, when he's coming to bring his korbanos, is still a mechusar kippurim. He's actually not allowed to offer a korban chatas. Therefore, he has to offer the korban asham first, because through bringing the korban asham and going through the whole process with the oil and with the blood of the asham followed by the oil. Anyways, so that whole process is then what allows him to be able to bring korbanos that he can then bring a korban chatas. So that's the exception where the korban chatas would come after the asham. Right, because the asham is dafka coming in that case to be machshir the mitzvah to then be able to bring the korban chatos. Kol hashamis shebateire boin b'nei shtayim. All korban ashams in the Torah are in their second year of their life. Uvain b'kesef shkalim, and must cost 2 shekels. Chutz me'asham nazav v'asham mitzvah, except for asham mitzoras and asham nazirs, right? The asham mitzora is the asham at the end of the mitzora's purification process, and the asham nazir, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is the asham that is brought if the nazir becomes tameh to a corpse and has to start all over. Shehein ba'in b'nei shnasan. In those cases, asham mitzora, asham nazir, they are within their first year. Ve'ein ba'in because of shkalim, and they are not 2 shekels. The bigger ashams that are in their second year, those cost 2 shekels. But the littler ashams of the asham mitzvah, asham tali, asham mitzvah, asham nazir, which are in their first year, they are not 2 shekels. Kishem she kodmin ba'akravasim kach kodmin ba'achilasim. Just like there is an order for which korbanos are offered first, there's also an order for for which are eaten first. It's the same order. So, okay, if you have a chatas, if a kohen has a chatas to eat and an asham to eat, he should eat first the chatas before the asham. Shlamim shel emesh v'shlamim shel hayom. Shel emesh kodmin, the shel yom. So the way that Rashi explains it, I'll explain it the way Rashi explains it. If yesterday already somebody brought a korban shlamim to the temple, to the Beis Hamikdash, and now it's today, and there's a new shlamim that somebody brought today. So now the kohen has to choose: should he first offer the shlamim that was already brought to the temple yesterday and has been waiting patiently to be slaughtered until today, overnight? It was alive. It wasn't slaughtered yet, so it's not like it's pasul belina or anything like that. So which shlamim should the kohen prioritize? The one that was brought already and has been waiting since yesterday, or the one from today? So the Mishnah says again, shlamim shel emesh. If you have a shlamim from yesterday, a shlamim shel yem, and a shlamim brought to the Beis Hamikdash today, shel emesh kodmin the shel yem, first offer the shlamim from yesterday and then offer the one from today. Now, what happens if shlamim shel emesh chatas v'asham shel hayem? Now, what happens in the following case? You have a shlamim from yesterday. Somebody brought a shlamim to the Beis Hamikdash yesterday, and now it's today. And now you have some chatas and ashams from today. Now, the shaila is that generally, of course, a chatas and an asham, which are kachim kachim, would be offered before a korban shlamim, which is kachim kal. But in this case, the shlamim is from the day before. So what happens in this case? Do we prioritize the shlamim? Shlamim shel emesh kodmin de Reb Meir. Reb Meir says, yes, prioritize the shlamim from yesterday, even though it's only a kachim kalim. Prioritize the shlamim from yesterday before the chatas and asham of today. Whereas the chacham say chatas kodemes, that the korban chatas comes first, because it's kadshe kachim. First offer the chatas, I assume it means the asham as well, and then only afterwards the shlamim from yesterday, because at the end of the day we're dealing with Kachei Kachim versus Kachim Kalim. Says the Chacham, the Kachei Kachim are always going to have precedence over the Kachim Kalim. V'chulan Hakayanim Rashayin Lishanus B'achilasin Lochlan Sluin V'shlukin V'muvushalin. And by all the korbanos, the Kohanim can cook it however they like. They can roast it, they can very boil it, they can boil it, whatever they want. Tavle chulin v'tavle truma, Reb Shimon. If they want, they could flavor it with spices of chulin, of non-holy spices, regular spices, or even truma spices. They can use truma spices to flavor the meat. Reb Meir lo yite nesochan tvale truma shelo yavi truma de psul. Whereas Reb Meir disagrees with Reb Shimon, and he says that the Kohanim should not be flavoring their meat with truma spices because you are bringing truma lidei psul, right? What? Because now you only have, a shorter amount of time to eat the truma, right? These truma spices you would have been able to eat forever, put on your shelf for however long you want. But now you put it on the truma on the korban. Now you have to eat it within a specific amount of time, otherwise it becomes pasul, becomes noser or whatever, right? So if you have a korban chatas or something, and you're spicing it with truma spice, so then all of a sudden, in a day from now, the truma is going to become pasul. So Reb Meir advises against that. Ibaylu, they ask a question. Tadir umekudesh eze mehem kodem. Okay, this is an interesting question. So if you have Tadir and Mekudesh, so Rashi gives an example, a theoretical example. What we're going to see in the Gemara, to my understanding, is we're not really going to be able to actually find a scenario where this is like going to work, like to actually be practical. But anyways, so if you have, for example, like let's say it's Rosh Chodesh, okay, and so you have the Korban Talmud, okay, the Korban Talmud is Korban Ola, whatever, and then you also have the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, and the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh is a Chatas. So on the one hand, you have the Korban Talmud, which is Tadir, but you also have the Musaf, which is a Chatas, which is more qadosh. I think that's the point, is that it's more qadosh. So which one? So which one do you do, right? Do you prioritize the Tadir one, right? The Korban, the Korban Talmud is every single day, or do you prioritize the more holy one? I'm gonna drink a little bit of water. Says the Gemara, do we say Tadir Kodem Mishum de Tadir? Do we say that the one that's more frequent has priority because it's more frequent, therefore the Korban Talmud should go first? O Dilma Mikudish Kodem de Kaddish. Or maybe the holier one should have priority, should have precedence because it's holier. Tashma, come in here. Our Mishnah says, Tmidin Kodem de Musafin. Right? Maybe you were wondering this as we were asking this question. Well, didn't we have a Mishnah that says that Tmidin Kodem de Musafin, that when you have Rosh Chodesh, for example, or Shabbos, I think we're going to assume that we're talking about Shabbos. So let's say you have Shabbos, and you have the Korban Talmud, and you have the Korban Musaf. Didn't we say in our Mishnah that the Talmud is prioritized over the Musaf for Shabbos? So there we have it, right? That priority goes to Tadir. V'avagav the Musaf and Kadisha. Even though the Musaf of Shabbos is a very holy thing, still the priority seems to be going to the Korban Talmud because it's Tadir. Atu Shabbos the Musafin anoi l'smidin lo anoi. To which the Gemara says, wait a second, not so fast. The premise of the question was, well, you have a Korban Talmud. The Korban Talmud is offered every single day, even during the week. It's not a particularly holy Korban. Whereas you have the Korban Musaf of Shabbos, wow, this Korban Musaf is being brought and it's Shabbos, it's the holiest thing in the world. The thing is, the Gemara says, the fact of the matter is, yes, Korban Tamid might be also offered during the week, but the fact of the matter is, it's right now Shabbos. And this is the Korban Tamid of Shabbos. And just like Shabbos, just like the kind of the holiness of Shabbos is part of the Musaf that's being offered, it's also part of the Korban Tamid that's being offered. And therefore, the Korban Tamid of Shabbos is just as holy as the Korban Musaf of Shabbos. If we're going to argue that the Korban Musaf is holier because it's a Shabbos Korban Musaf, well, the Korban Tamid is a Shabbos Korban Tamid. So therefore, in terms of the holiness of Shabbos, it's held equally by the Korban Tamid and the Korban Musaf. So therefore, it's not like one is actually more holy than the other. And we're going to see a whole bunch of scenarios like this, which is why I said earlier that I don't think that the Gemara actually succeeds to find the scenario where you would have a Tamid versus qadosh, whereas the qadosh wouldn't also be relevant to the Tamid as well. The qadosh would be relevant to the Tamid as well. Tashma, come in here. Musvei Shabbos, Kodman Musvei Rosh Chodesh. If you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so you have Musaf of Shabbos, you have Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. So we say that the Musaf of Shabbos comes first because it's Tadir. And we want to say, yeah, but Rosh Chodesh is holier. Rashi says because it's called a Moed, also because on Rosh Chodesh there's a Korban Chatas, and therefore the Chatas is holier than the Olas HaTamid. But still, after Rosh Chodesh, the Musafin Didei Ahani, what? The fact that it's Rosh Chodesh is only relevant for the Korban Musaf, the Musaf Shabbos Lo Ani. It's not also, Rosh Chodesh isn't also relevant even for the Musaf of Shabbos. At the end of the day, it's Rosh Chodesh today. And it's Rosh Chodesh for, the holiness of Rosh Chodesh applies to all the Korbanos that are going to be offered that day. Even the korbanos that even the Musvei Shabbos. The fact of the matter is, I feel like I'm not explaining this well. I don't know how to explain it better. What does Rashi say? The Tamid Nahani came to Idna Craven Imkain Shem Shabbos Aleim. This was from before, right? The Shabbos versus the Tamid. The shame, right? The fact of the matter is, it's Shabbos in the previous example. Therefore, the holiness of Shabbos applies to the Tamid as well. In the previous example, here we have the Musaf of Shabbos, the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. We want to say that the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh is holier, and yet we're still offering the Musaf of Shabbos first because it's Tamid. But the fact of the matter is, the holiness of Rosh Chodesh is being applied to is going to be relevant to the Shabbos korbanos as well. It was like shame Shabbos Aleim, and therefore shame Rosh Chodesh is also going to be on the Musvei Shabbos that are being offered on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Okay, yeah, I that's kind of the definition of it, and this concept is going to keep on coming up over the next, bunch of lines in Gemara. So even if I struggle to explain it, that's the point. Is that if you have a Korban Tamid being brought on Shabbos, Shabbos applies to Korban Tamid as well. If you have a Musaf of Shabbos being brought on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh applies to the Musaf of Shabbos as well. If it's Rosh Chodesh, okay. Tashma, come in here. Musaf Rosh Chodesh. Korban the Musaf Rosh Hashanah. Okay, the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh would take priority over Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. So Avagav Rosh Hashanah, Kadsha. Even though Rosh Hashanah is more Kadosh than Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tif. Regular Rosh Chodesh is not as holy as Rosh Hashanah, and yet priority goes to the Mishnah said priority goes to Rosh Chodesh because it's Tadir. But again, after Rosh Hashanah, the Musvei Didei Ahani, the Musvei Rosh Chodesh Lo Yahani. What does the shame Rosh Hashanah only apply to the Rosh Hashanah Musavs, not to the Musvei Rosh Chodesh that are also brought that day? I assume that's the point. I didn't actually look it up to confirm that Rosh Chodesh Musavs are also offered on Rosh Hashanah, but that definitely seems to be the implication here. Tashma, come in here. Davar acher birkas hayayin tadira ubirkas hayom eina tadira v'tadav v'shenu tadir kodem. This is based on a Mishnah in Psachim. The Mishnah in Psachim, in Arvei Psachim, quotes a machloikes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about what comes first, the bracha of Borei Pri Hagafen or the bracha of Kiddush Hayom. Whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Yom Tov. Right now, we're gonna, I think, assume that we're talking about Shabbos. So what comes first, right? Do you say Borei Pri Hagafen first, or do you say Mekadosh Shabbos first on Kiddush on Friday night? So Beis Hillel says, as we do, the bracha on Borei Pri Hagafen comes first, and then Mekadosh Shabbos. And he gives two answers. The first answer is, well, because it's only because of the fact that you have wine that you're able to make Kiddush. If you don't have wine or bread, you're not going to be making Kiddush. So therefore, it's only because you have wine that you're making Kiddush. Davar Acher, alternatively, as our Gemara quotes, Birkas Hayayin Tadir. The bracha on wine is Tadir. We always make brachas on wine whenever we drink wine. Whereas Ubirkas HaShabbos Eina Tadira, Ubirkas Hayom Eina Tadira. Whereas the Mekadosh Shabbos, the bracha of the day, is only once a week. V'tadav Sheno Tadir, Tadir Kodem. And when you have something that's frequent and something less frequent, we go with the more frequent. Therefore, the Borei Pri Hagafen takes precedence. Afal Gav the Birkas Hayom Kadisha. Even though the bracha on about Mekadosh Shabbos is more holy, still we go with Borei Pri Hagafen. Atu Shabbos the Birkas Hayom Ha'anoi, the Birkas Yayin Hayayin Lo Ha'anoi. What does the shame Shabbos is the fact that it's Shabbos? Is it only for the bracha of Mekadosh Shabbos, not for the Borei Pri Hagafen? Of course not. The holiness of Shabbos applies to both of them. I'm going to drink a little bit more water. Tashma, come and hear. Rabbi Yochanan says halacha that the halacha is mispal adam shel mincha v'chakach shel musaf. This is talking about a scenario where it's the afternoon. It's the afternoon and a person has not yet davened korban musaf, and it's already time for him to daven korban mincha. The question is, should he first daven korban musaf, or should he first daven? Wait, what? Should he first daven musaf, or should he first daven mincha? That's the shaila. And says Rabbi Yochanan, mispal adam shel mincha v'chakach shel musafin. Person should first daven mincha and then afterwards musaf. Atu Shabbos the tfilas musafin ahanoi the tfilas mincha lo ahanoi. So we saw that from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting is saying that the halacha is that you should have mincha first, is because it's tadir. And even though musaf is holier because it's a Shabbos musaf, right? There's a note. What does the note say? If I forgot the tfilas musaf in kadisha, exactly. Even though musaf of Shabbos it's holier than mincha, nonetheless, we say do mincha first because it's tadir. But says the Gemara again, to Shabbos the tefillas musafin anoi, the tefillas mincha lo anoi. What is the shame Shabbos? The fact that it's Shabbos only relevant to musaf, it's not relevant to mincha as well. And therefore, the holiness, therefore, musaf is not holier than mincha because they're both. Shabbos is shaykh to both of them. Tashma coming here. Shlomim shel emesh. Chades v'asham shel yom. When you have a korban shlomim from yesterday, somebody brought the shlomim to the Beis Hamikdash yesterday, and now it's today, and somebody also brought today chatas and asham. So shlomim shel emesh kodmin. So the shlamim from yesterday takes priority, right? So when somebody brought a shlamim to the Beis Hamikdash yesterday, and now it's today, and the shlamim still hasn't been offered, and now somebody brought today a chatas and an ashram, which goes first? We said that the shlamim goes first since it was already waiting from yesterday. But ha'idi ve'idi diyom. But if the shlamim and the chatas and the ashim, everything was brought to the Beis Hamikdash today, chatas v'ashim kadmei, the chatas and ashim would take priority over the shlamim if everything was brought to the Beis Hamikdash today. V'avagav the shlamim tadirei, even though the shlamim is tadir. I guess the point is it's more common to bring a korban shlamim than it is to bring a korban chatas. Okay, and nonetheless, we give priority to the chatas and ashim because they are holier. On my Ravit, to which Ravit says, Matzui ka'amar, Tadir kami ba'ilan, Matzui lo kami ba'ilan. Interesting. To which Ravit says, wait, but you can't, no, that's not a good place to bring a raya from, because shlamim isn't tadir. Shlamim is matzui. Babble makes an interesting distinction, an interesting chilik between frequent and common. Tadir means frequent. When you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and the shaila is, do you first offer the Musaf of Shabbos, or do you first offer the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh? We say, well, Shabbos is once per week. Rosh Chodesh is only once per month. Therefore, since Shabbos is more frequent, it's Tadir, it comes first. Shlamim versus Chatos is not Tadir, it's not frequent, it's not like, once a week you offer a shlamim and once a month you offer a chatas. It's not like that. We're saying that, okay, it's more common that ashrams will be, that shlamims will be offered rather than a chatas or an ashram. But common is different than frequent, and tadir is frequent. So it says, Rava, you can't bring a raya from shlamim and chatas and ashram. Again, Amar Rava says, Rava Motzi Kamar. Shlamim is not more frequent than chatas and ashram. It might be more common. Tadir kami ba'ilam, but we're asking about frequency. Matzi lo kami ba'ilam, we're not asking about common. Amle Ravuna bar Yehuda l'Rava, but says Ravuna bar Yehuda to Rava, atu matzui lab tadira. One second. Rava, is that really the case? We can't view common as frequent. We can't consider common to be tadir. But I'll bring you a raya. I'll ask you a question. Vatani, we learn about Otzias HaPesach she'enu tadir, v'lo Otzias HaMila shehi tadira. You hear the question, friends? The question is, should there be a korban chatas for Mila and korban Pesach? If one doesn't do Mila or korban Pesach, these are both mitzvahs that have a chiyuv kares associated with them. So if by accident you didn't do it, should you have to bring a korban chatas? So we say there, again, Otzias HaPesach, I'll say there will be no korban chatas for Pesach, she'enu tadir, because it's not tadir. It's once a year. V'lo Otzias HaMila, but I won't exclude Mila. I'll say that there would be a korban chatas for Mila, shehi tadira, because it's tadir. Mila happens all the time. Babies are born all the time, every day of the year. So the shaila is, we're saying that Mila is tadir, but based on how Rava was describing things, Mila isn't tadir, it's matzui. It's not frequent, it's common. It's very common that babies are born. It's very common that there are bris milas. But there isn't like a fixed schedule that like there are bris milas once a week or something. No, it's whenever babies are born. It's very common, but it's not frequent. And yet we're calling it tadir. Well, my tadir b'mitzvahs. V'bayis ema mila l'gabe pesach ki tadir damyu. The Gemara gives two answers, which I feel like they're both like a little bit unclear, but to me at least. But my tadir b'mitzvahs. When it says tadir b'mitzvahs, what does it mean tadir b'mitzvahs? Well, Rashi says that Mila was nitna b'shlosh esrei brisos. Right? It says bris 13 times by Mila, so therefore that makes it like frequent, because there was so many brisos, so many covenants around bris Mila, so that makes it frequent. Okay, so even though, yes, I would technically define Mila as common versus frequent, but because it says bris 13 times, we can consider it to be frequent. Okay. Or you could say Mila relative to Korban Pesach. Pesach is literally once a year. Mila is every day of the year. So when you have such a significant sort of difference, right? Once a year versus every day, so it could be considered frequent, even though technically it's really common. So what do we see? So it sounds like normally you wouldn't be able to use common as tadir. Mila is exceptional. Okay. So where are we at, friends? We had asked this question about tadir versus qadosh. Which one has priority? I don't think that we succeeded to find a scenario where we purely Tadir versus qadosh. In almost every scenario, whatever was making the qadosh more qadosh would be equally relevant to the Tadir as well. For example, on Shabbos, when you have the Korban Talmud and the Korban Musaf, the Korban Musaf is so holy because it's Shabbos, but Shabbos applies to the Korban Talmud of Shabbos as well. And that was basically the case with all of the scenarios. We then had the scenario of the Shlom, but we said Shlom anyways isn't Tadir, it's Matsui. So I think that we didn't actually really succeed in finding a relevant scenario. And now we get up to the next section of the daf, when Tadir is out of order, right? Of course we say Tadir v'sheino Tadir, Tadir kodem, right? The thing that's more frequent has priority. What if you made a mistake? It's Shabbos or Chodesh. You should offer the Korban Musaf of Shabbos before the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. You slaughter, however, the Korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, which is out of order. Now what do? That's the question. That's a kasha. Tadir v'she'eno Tadir, v'kodem v'shachal l'she'eno Tadir. Okay, it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. So Shabbos is more frequent than Rosh Chodesh. So the Musaf of Shabbos should have priority. However, the Kohen slaughtered the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh first. Now he didn't yet do Zrikas Adam or anything like that. It's lying there dead. What do? So do we say, came in the shachate makriv le? Do we say, okay, look, you already slaughtered the Rosh Chodesh Musaf. All right, just go offer that first. When you're done, come back and offer the Shabbos Musaf. Or perhaps Yoiv le'acher dememaris b'damo, or maybe, after slaughtering the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, you did Kabbalas Adam. The Kohen did Kabbalas Adam in a klisharis. So maybe he should give the klisharis to somebody to mix and to stir the blood so that it doesn't congeal, and to just keep on mixing it while while he goes back to the Musaf of Shabbos and he slaughters that one and does Zrikas Adam and offers it and everything, and then he'll come back and finish up the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. So again, what do we do in this scenario? Right, he slaughtered the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh and he realized, oops. So does he just complete the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, or does he put that on pause, go and offer the Musaf of Shabbos and come back to the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh? Amar Avuna Misur. It says Avuna Misur Tashma. Come in here. Okay. Shlomim shel emesh. Okay, we have the korban shlomim from yesterday. All right. Chatas v'asham shel yom. And you have a chatas and an asham from today. Shel emesh kodem l'shel yom. So we say from the shlomim from yesterday takes priority over the chatas and asham of today. Hadiyom dumya de emesh. But if we're talking about today, similar to yesterday, what does that mean? So first of all, so it says ve'echi dami, but I want to explain it outside before we look at it inside. So we're assuming that it's talking about where the shlomim was already slaughtered. So we're saying that if you have a shlomim from yesterday and it was already slaughtered, and now we have a chatas and an asham from today that have not yet been slaughtered, we say continue with the asham with the shlomim from yesterday and finish offering it. However, we would say if this was today, right, that's because the shlomim was from yesterday. But what if this was today? And how so? The same thing. That he slaughtered. This was a shlomim that somebody brought to the Beis Hamikdash today, and there was also a chatas and an asham that somebody brought to the Beis Hamikdash today. And just like in the case from yesterday, it was already slaughtered. The shlomim was already slaughtered. So we're saying that if it was a shlomim from today, chatas ve'asham kadme. We're saying, so again, when this was a shlomim from yesterday, and now it's today, and today you slaughtered the shlomim from yesterday's shlomim, that was brought to this Mikdash yesterday, you slaughtered today. And now there's also, however, a chatas and an asham. We say, what do? You have a shlam, which is kachin kalim. You have a chatas and an asham, which is kachin. What do? We say, well, since the shlam was from yesterday, finish up the shlam, implying that if the shlam was from today, and you already slaughtered it, but haven't yet done zrikas adam, and there's a chatas and an asham, we would say, pause the shlamim and offer, slaughter and offer the chatas and asham. So we see that when things are offered out of order, we do put things on pause. Again, that he slaughtered the shlamim out of order, chatas v'asham kadme, and you would nonetheless offer the chatas and asham first, i.e., you would pause the shlamim in order to offer the chatas and asham. Dilma shlamim de emesh v'chatas v'asham diyom heichim mishkachasla. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily. How do you know that we're talking about where the shlamim was already slaughtered and the chatas and asham were not? Maybe it's talking about where they were all slaughtered. Maybe it's talking about the shlamim was slaughtered. The chatas and asham were also slaughtered. And the question is, so which one do we finish first? And maybe we're saying, so if this was a shlamim from yesterday, finish the shlamim first and then finish the chatas and asham. If this was a shlamim from today and a chatas and an asham from today and everything's already been slaughtered, so then we say, you know what? Finish the chatas and asham first and come back to the shlamim. However, we don't know though what would be the case if the shlamim was offered and the chatas and asham were not yet, if the shlamim was slaughtered and the chatas and asham were not yet slaughtered. What would we say there? What would we say to slaughter and offer the chatas and asham then? We don't know. Again, it could be that we're talking about where the shlamim from yesterday, as well as the chatas and asham, everything was already slaughtered. I have a note here that I'm going to add. And the adapted for today, meaning if the shlamim was from today, as well as the chatas and asham from today, and you slaughtered all of them, so we're saying that in that case, complete the chatas and asham and then come back to complete the shlamim. However, we don't know what the answer would be. However, if you slaughtered a shlamim out of order, but you didn't yet do zrikas adam, and you haven't yet slaughtered the chatas and asham, what do you do then? We don't necessarily know. Tashma, come in here. Davar acher birkas hayayin tadira uvirkas hayom ena tadira v'tadav shenu tadu tadu kodem. This is what we mentioned earlier with regard to the order of brachas on kiddush. You have birkas hayom, Piyagafin, as well as Mikadosh HaShabbos. So we had said that you make a bracha on the Brei Piyagafin first. Now, what's interesting here is that, Shabbos had already started. You're making Kiddush on Shabbos. It's already Shabbos, right? So in that sense, if Shabbos already started, I would think maybe just finish it and say Mikadosh Shabbos first, since it's already Shabbos. So say Mikadosh Shabbos first, finish that up. And then say Brei Piyagafin. And we're saying, no, interrupt and first say Brei Piyagafin and then get back to Mikadosh Shabbos, even though Shabbos had already started before you were saying Brei Piyagafin. Again, Davar Acher, Birkas Hayayin Tadir, make the bracha on the wine first. Birkas Hayom, Birkas Hayayin Tadir, Birkas Hayom Eina Tadir. The bracha on the wine is frequent, even though it's really common. But anyways, the bracha on the wine is Tadir. And the bracha on Shabbos is less tadir. Make a bracha on the wine because it's more tadir. Which means that we're basically interrupting sort of the kedusha of Shabbos to make a bracha on wine and then getting back to Mekadosh Shabbos after. Hachinami, however, here as well, the chevon de asyon The thing is, both the bracha on Bor Pri Hagafen and the bracha on Shabbos, right, Rikadosh Shabbos, they're both readily available. They're both right there, right? You have a glass full of wine right in front of you. It's already Shabbos. Do I make the bracha on the wine? Do I make the bracha on the Shabbos? It's basically like when you have the shlamim and the chatas, both of them already slaughtered. The question is, do you finish this one? Do you finish that one? Right? So we said in that case, you would go based on the priority. So you're also, in this case, if the priority is Tadir, which is the wine, so make a bracha on the wine first. Tashma Kavnid Amar B'Yochanan says B'Yochanan similarly Halach Misbal Adam Shel Mincha V'Achar Shel Musafin. Right. So here also we have right. It was already the time for Musaf. Right. It was already Zman Musaf since the morning. And now we're saying, wait, but first do Mincha and then get back to finish Musaf. So Achanami here as well came into Matis Man Tfilas Mincha Kiman Deshchite Tarvayu Dami here as well. Since it's both the time for Musaf as well as the time for Mincha, so it's basically like a scenario where both korbanos are slaughtered, and the question is, do you finish this one first or that one first? You go based on priority, and here the priority is Mincha because it's Tadir. Amalei Rav Acha B'Derava, Amalei Rav Acha B'Derav Ashi L'Ravina, Toshma Shochato. Kodem chatzos posum p'nei bo ben arbaim. That if the korban pesach is slaughtered before chatzos, it's possible because the pasuk says ben arbaim. What is it supposed to say? Vayilchem the mishmeres ad arba also yom l'chodesh azeh shachtu also kol adas ben arbaim. It has to be in the afternoon. If you slaughter a korban pesach before chatzos, it's possible because it's not ben arbaim. It needs to be in the afternoon. Kodem the Talmud kosher. However, the korban pesach also needs to be slaughtered after the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. You first offer the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, and then you offer the korban pesach. Now, if you had first slaughtered the korban pesach, before the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, which is out of order. So what do we say? We say kosher. The korban pesach is kosher, but ve'ememaris bedamo. You should be stirring the blood to prevent it from congealing. Ad sheizarek adam, until you do zrikas adam for the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, i.e., pause the korban pesach in order to offer the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, which is the one that is really the higher priority. So we see, to answer the question, if you have Shabbos Musaf, and you first slaughtered if you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and first you slaughter the Rosh Chodesh out of order, it sounds like we're saying, put it on hold, offer the Musaf of Shabbos, and get back to the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Putzi Gemara says, no. Hachanami, Hachav Ma'askin here, what are we talking about? Kigon dekadim shachte l'tamid bereisha. No, it's talking about where he had also slaughtered the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. So now you have the korban pesach and the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim, both of which have been slaughtered. So we're saying, do the zrikas adam for the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim first, and then get back to the korban pesach. Amalei Rav Acha Sova Rav Ashi Masniza Namideka. We can also infer this from our Mishnah, the Gatani from the Mishnah and Psachim that we just quoted, that says, do the korban Shel Bein Arbaim and get back to the korban pesach. Ad sheyizarik adam v'lo katani ad sheyishchot v'yizuk dam shmamina. But that in that Mishnah and Psachim it says, stir the blood of the korban pesach to prevent it from congealing, while you do zrikas adam of the korban Talmud. It doesn't say while you slaughter the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. It says why you do zrikas adam, because it has already been slaughtered. So again, that's talking about a scenario where both the korban pesach and the korban Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim have already been slaughtered. What would be the case where the higher priority hasn't yet been slaughtered, right? Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, where you slaughter the korban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh first, And now you say, wait, what do we do? Do we pause it and do the Korban Tamid the Musaf of Shabbos and get back to the Rosh Chodesh? Or do we say finish Rosh Chodesh? Again, I don't think that we answered that question. So basically the entire first Amud of Daf Sadi Aleph, the entire Sadi Aleph, Amud Aleph, we've been like asking these questions and struggling to find answers to them, right? The first question we said, right, what's higher priority, Tadir or qadosh? We struggled to find the scenario where you would have something that's qadosh and, right, something where something's only Tadir and only qadosh. And here also, when Tadir is out of order, what do you do? Again, we struggled to find the scenario where we'd be able to find a solution to this quandary. The Mishnah had said that the Kohanim can cook the korbanos however they like. My time outcome, the pasuk says Limoshcha Ligdula that the pasuk says that the Rabbanah Shalom has given the korbanos to the Kohanim Limoshcha, and Unklis, as Rashi points out, Unklis says it's Lirevo, which is Ligdula, just like the kings eat however they like, whatever in the mood for, whatever they prefer. So also the Kohanim, when they're eating the Kohanim, they can cook them and prepare them however they like. And now we get up to the next Mishnah on today's daf, the final Mishnah of the 10th parak of Masechta Zevachim. And we are transitioning into discussions about libation donations, specifically in this case, oil donations. Can a person donate a shemen libation to the Beis Hamikdash? Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon, Im ra'isa shemen shu mischalik ba'azara. Okay. Says Rabbi Shimon, if you see that the Kohanim are dividing amongst themselves oil in the Azara, einat tzarich lishol ma'u, you don't have to say, oh, what's going on over here? I'll tell you what's going on over here. Ela moser rikike minachos Yisrael. Either it is the leftover oil from the mincha of Yisrael. We're going to learn more about this in Menachos that we're going to start in a month. But be'etzem, it's either leftover oil from the rekikim of the korban mincha of Yisrael. V'log shemen shel mitzara. Alternatively, it could be the mitzara as part of his purification process. We talked about the ashram earlier as well, but we also referenced the fact that that oil is brought with as part of the purification of the mitzara as well. And of course, the oil is put on his bahonis, and whatever is left over after the bahonis can be divided among the Kohanim. So if the Kohanim are dividing oil in the Azara amongst themselves, it's either left over from a korban mincha of a Yisrael or from a mitzvah. Im ra'isa shemen shu nitan al gabi ha'ishin. Now, if you see oil being burnt on the mizbeach, ein tzarich lishol ma'u, you don't have to ask yourself what is. Ella, it's either moser rikike minchas kohanim, the leftover oil from the rekikin of the minchas of kohanim, because minachos of kohanim are entirely burnt to the mizbeach. Right? There's no shirayim that the kohanim eat. No, it's entirely burnt to the mizbeach. So now, if there's any leftover oil from the rekikin wafers of the mincha of a kohen, so that oil will not be divided among the kohanim, it will be burnt in the mizbeach. Uminchas kohen Mashiach, additionally, any leftover oil from the minchas chavitin that the kohen gadol offers every day, so that leftover oil would be burnt on the mizbeach as well. So if you see oil being burnt on the mizbeach, it's either leftover from the rekikin of a kohen or from the minchas chavitin of the kohen gadol. Shemisnadvin shemen. And that's because you don't donate oil libations to the Beis Hamikdash. You can't go to the Beis Hamikdash and say, I'm offering oil. you could do that with wine. You could say, I'm bringing a wine libation, and they'll libate it, as we'll learn about later. But you can't do that with oil, and according to Reb Shimon. Let's go weiter for a second. Reb Tarfon over Misnadvin Shimon. Tarfon says that you can make an oil donation. And therefore, according to Reb Shimon, when you see the Kohanim dividing up oil or burning oil, it's not going to be a oil from an oil donation, because there are no oil donations. Reb Tarfon, however, says that there are oil donations. You can just say, I wanna donate oil as a libation in the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, the Gemara is going to talk about what exactly the implications are, but therefore maybe you will see Kohanim dividing up donated oil or burning donated oil. Okay, so we saw the machlokas there between Reb Shimon and Reb Tarfon about, can you donate oil to the Beis Hamikdash? Reb Shimon says no. Reb Tarfon says yes. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel. Says Shmuel, L'dibrei Reb Tarfon. According to Reb Tarfon, he says you can donate oil. Hamisnadev shemen, somebody who donates oil to the Beis Hamikdash, komtzo v'shiyarav nechalin. So says Shmuel that according to Reb Tarfon, who says that oil can be donated to the Beis Hamikdash, so the kohen would take a kometz from the oil, now not literally a fistful because it's oil, but I think I read somewhere 2 kazesim, but basically some of the oil would be poured onto the fire and burnt on the mizbeach, but the rest would go to the kohanim. My time out come. I recall the pasuk says korban mincha. Right, the pasuk says v'nefesh kisakriv korban mincha. When a person offers a korban mincha, now it doesn't need to say korban mincha. It could just say adam kisakriv mincha. What's korban mincha? Melamed shemisnadvin shemen. So from the extra word korban, we learn that you can even donate oil as well, not just flour offerings, but even just a oil offering you can offer as well. Melamed shemisnadvin shemen v'chi mincha ma mincha komtza v'shiareh necholin af shemen komtza v'shiareh necholin. And since we're learning out oil donations from flour donations, just like from a donated mincha, a kometz would be burnt on the mizbeach and the rest would be eaten by the kohanim. So the same for oil offerings. If somebody offers an oil offering, some of it would be burnt on the mizbeach and the rest would go to the kohanim. Amar Reb Zera afanam tanina, and Reb Zera says that our Mishnah is supportive of this. And Reb Shimon says, Reb Shimon, Imra Isa Shemen Shemischalik Ba'azar, if you see oil being divided in the Azar, you don't have to wonder what in the world is it, because it's either one of two things. Elamoser Rikike Minachis Yisrael Minchas Yisrael. Alternatively, Vilog Shemen Shamitzar She'ein Misnadvin Shemen, because there are no oil offerings. So therefore, there's no concern that they're dividing up oil offerings. What they're dividing up is either the leftover oil from the Rakik of Yisrael or the leftover oil from a Mitzar Michlal, the Mandam Misnadvin, implying, meaning if we're saying according to Reb Shimon, you don't have to be concerned that it's an oil donation being divided up because there are no oil donations, implying that according to Reb Tarfon, it says that there are oil donations. Well then, we do have to be, right, there would be a possibility that what you're seeing is that they're dividing up an oil donation. Which would mean, how would that be? Well, part of the oil is being burnt in this mizbeach, and the rest is going to the kohanim, and therefore they're dividing it up, like Shmuel says. Abaye says, but wait, I'll tell you the seifa, Imra Isa Shemen, Shenitan Adabe Ishim, Yatzarich Lishomau. Abaye says, well, the seifa of the Mishnah says that if you see that the kohanim are burning oil on the mizbeach, you don't have to say what in the world is going on. Ella, because it's only one of two things. Most rikike minchas kohanim. It's the leftover oil from the rikikim, from the wafers of the mincha of the kohanim. Minchas koy Mashiach, or it's from the leftover oil from the minchas chavitin. She'em is not been shemen, because there are no oil offerings, so there's no concern that it's oil, that it's a voluntary oil offering being poured in the mizbeach. Michlal tilman da'amar misnadvin kulan de'ishin. So Abaye wants to say, implying that if voluntary oil offerings could be offered, well then there would additionally be a possibility that it could be a voluntary oil offering being poured on the mizbeach in its entirety, says Abaye. Perhaps because it's being compared to the leftovers of the Minchas Chavitin and the Rikike Koyanim, which are poured there in their entirety. But says Abaye that if you say that there are oil donations, so then they would be entirely burnt on the Mizbeach, and therefore Abaye says that would be, assuming that that's correct, says Abaye, that would be a question for Reb Zera and Shmuel as well, who say that part of it would be divided among the Kohanim. Whereas Abaye says that all of it would be burnt on the Mizbeach. I'm going to drink a little water. Says the Gemara, Abaye Kasha Reisha. So according to Abaye, there's a question of the Reisha, right, which talks about that the implication being that if there are oil offerings, they would be divided among the Kohanim, whereas according to Abaye, it would be entirely burnt to the Mizbeach. The Reb Zera Kasha Seifa, according to Reb Zera, it's the Kasha on the Seifa that Abaye wants to say implies that the oil would entirely be burnt on the Mizbeach, and Reb Zera says only part of it. Bishlam of the Reb Zera, look, I can answer according to Reb Zera, Reisha b'shirayim seifa b'kometz. Look, according to Reb Zera, look, the Reisha of the Mishnah that's talking about the oil being divided among the Kohanim, that's the leftover oil. And when the Seifa talks about oil being burnt on the Mizbeach, that's talking about the kometz. So kilu, according to Reb Zera, we would simply say part of it's burnt on the Mizbeach, the kometz, and the rest of it is divided among the Kohanim. Ela Abaye kasha, according to Abaye, how would there be a possibility of any of the oil being divided among the Kohanim if it's entirely being burnt in the Mizbeach? Tana Reisha Atu Seifa. Says Abaye, well, you're right. We didn't really need to teach the Reisha because in the Reisha, everyone seems to agree, right? Even Reb Tarfon agrees, according to Abaye, that no oil would be divided among the Kohanim. So we don't need to really say Reb Shimon's opinion because it seems to be the consensus opinion. Everyone seems to agree. However, we only mention the Reisha because of the Seifa. Since we're talking about the Seifa, about when things are burned, so we also mention the Reisha when things are divided, even though technically we don't need it. B'Shlama Seifa, Tani Mishum Reisha. One second. I understand the concept of like when you had a Reisha, and the Reisha needed to be written, and once already we're writing the written, so we also write an additional related thing. But El Reisha Mishum Seifa Mitani, do we ever have a scenario where we first write something that there was no reason to write because afterwards something else was going to be written? Actually we do have a precedent. Amr ibn Marav, we say in Eretz Yisrael, Tana Reisha Mishum Seifa, that yes, you can have something taught in the Reisha that really wasn't needed, but it's just there because of the Seifa. Tashma, Yain Kidiv Akiva l'sfalim. Says Rabbi Akiva that when wine is donated to the Beis Hamikdash for libations, so it would be poured into the receptacles on the top of the Mizbech. Shemen Kidiv Reb Tarfon leishim. When Reb Tarfon says that oil could be donated to the Beis Hamikdash, it would entirely be burnt on the fire. Well, it would be burnt on the fire. My love, midiyayin kula l'sfalim, shemen kula leishim. So we want to say that, well, okay, if we're kind of juxtaposing wine and oil, so just like the wine would be entirely poured into the receptacles. So when we say that according to Reb Tarfon, you could bring oil offerings and they would be burnt on the mizbech, I would assume it means entirely burnt on the mizbech, like Abaye is saying. Midi area kadisa kidisa. To which we say, nah. Not necessarily. You could say that, yes, the wine is entirely poured into the receptacles, into the svalim on top of the mizbech. However, you could say that the oil, only a kometz is burnt on the fire. The rest would go to the kohanim. You can skip the next two words. Amar Papa. Kitanoi. Okay, so let's say it's a machlokas tanoim about, do you only burn a kometz on the mizbech, or do you entirely burn the oil on the mizbech. And as part of this, we'll also see exactly a machlokas between exactly how much oil would be included in this donation as well. Shemen, it says the Tanna Kama, when it comes to oil donation, lo yifchos milo, it should be no less than a log of oil. Rebbe Omer Shloshes Logan. And Rebbe says an oil donation has to be at least 3 logs of oil. But Micah, what is the machlokas? How come the Tanna Kama says 1 log and Rebbe says 3 logs? Amur Rabbanan Kama Papa. So the rabbis had said before at Papa, they wanted to say the following: Don mina umina, don mina vuki baso ikabenau. The nafkamina between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe is don mina umina versus don mina vuki baso. Who can tell me what that means? That means is when, if you learn out, B from A, or should we say A from B? A from B. If you learn out A from B, and now there's other details about A related to what was learned out from B, the question is, where do those details come from? Do we say that once we're learning out A from B, we're not just we're learning out the principle from B, but all details associated with the principle also we're pulling in from B? Or do we say, thank you very much, I learned the principle from B. The rest of the details we can figure out on our own from A, how they're, whatever they would be in the context of A. Sorry if using abstract terms like A and B, but basically in this case, we're saying that we're learning an oil libation from a voluntary oil from a donation of, I guess that's the same thing, voluntary oil donation, but a voluntary oil offering from a voluntary mincha offering. So we learned the principle, right, as we learned earlier, right at the 3rd line of the page. It said korban mincha mlamet shebisnad and shemen. That in the context of a korban mincha, right, the pasuk says v'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha LaHashem. If a person brings a korban mincha Hashem, we say that just like you bring a korban mincha, you could bring a oil offering as well. So the principle of being able to donate an oil offering comes from the fact that you could donate a flour offering. So do we say that now that we learned about oil offerings from flour offerings, do we now also need to learn all other details from flour offerings? Flour offering, by the way, there would just be 1 log of shemen. Or do we say that no, once already we learned the principle from flour offerings, now we'll take it from here and we'll look to other libations like wine libations to get the rest of our details. Okay. So the rabbi said before, Papa, they wanted to say that don mina vuki ba'aso ikabenayu, that the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rebbe and how they get to their respective conclusions is based on whether they view things as don mina umina, that learned something as that if we're learning oil from flour, we're also going to learn all the rest from flour as well. Or do we say don mina, learn oil from flour, but in terms of the details, v'uki ba'asra, thank you very much, we will look to other libations for the rest of the details, not from flour offerings. To Rabbanan Savre, I'm going to add a few words here. To Rabbanan Savre, don mina umina, that the rabbis say, not only do we learn the principle of voluntary oil offerings from flour offerings, but also all other details. So don mina ma mincha, back in the Gemara, ma mincha misnadvin av shemen misnadvin. Just like you can donate a flour offering, you could donate an oil offering. Umina, and further we learn from flour offerings, ma mincha log shemen. Just like by a voluntary flour offering, it is accompanied with 1 log of oil. Afghan log shemen, also a voluntary oil offering, is going to be 1 log of shemen. Uma mincha komtza v'shiareh ne'echalin, and just like by a korban mincha, a kometz is burnt, and the rest of the mincha is eaten by the kohanim. So av shemen komtzo v'shiarav ne'echalin, also by a oil offering, a kometz will be burnt, and the rest will be divided among the Kohanim. So we see that according to the Tanakama, we're talking about 1 log of oil, and a kometz is burnt, and the rest is eaten by the Kohanim. Now, the Idach, Rebbe, however, so I'm going to actually change some words here. The Rebbe savar domina v'uki ba'asra, whereas Rebbe holds domina v'uki ba'asra. Domina, I'm back in the Gemara now. Ma mincha, you see where I am? Ma mincha misnadvin, avshem misnadvin. Okay, so domina, just like the Tanakama had said, that just like you can offer a voluntary mincha, you can donate a oil offering. But however, v'uki ba'asra, kinesachim. Well, now from this point on, we are going to look to other libations, namely wine libations, for the rest of the halachas of the oil libations. Manisachim shlosh logan, just like a voluntary wine libation would be 3 logs. Avshem and shalosh logan, also oil offerings would be 3 logs. Just like wine is entirely poured into the receptacles on top of the mizbeach, avshem and kulon laishin. So also by the oil offerings, we're talking about burning all of the oil. Okay, so we want to say that this question of is a kometz offered burnt from the oil, and the rest is enjoyed by the Kohanim, or is it entirely burnt on the mizbeach? It's machlokas tanoim. Amli Rav Papa, Amli Rav Papa. You could change it to. So Rav Papa says to the right, because we said Amur Rabban and Rav Papa. The rabbis before Rav Papa that suggested that this is a machlokas. The machlokas in Tanakam and Rebbe is about domina omina versus domina vuki ba'asra. But Rav Papa says to them, Imi mincha ma'isila Rebbe dechule alma domina umina. Says Rav Papa, look, everybody agrees domina umina. Rav Papa says, Rebbe also says domina umina. The thing is, he's not actually learning it out from mincha. Ela Rebbe me ezrach gomer lo. He's not learning it out from voluntary flour offerings, which is just 1 log of oil. No, rather he's learning it out from voluntary korbanis that brought with those korbanis are minchas nesachim and nisuchayayin, and there with those korbanis, the minimum would be a revius ahin, and ahin is 12 logs, right? So for a kevis, revius ahin, like kevis, there would be a 3 logs of wine and oil. So because the minimum when oil is brought as part of a libation for a korban, the minimum would be 3 logs. So that is how Rebbe learns out 3 logs. Amalei Rav Huna Brei to Rav Nosson Rav Papa. Rav Huna Brei to Rav Nosson says, Rav Papa mimatzos amatachi. Can you say that Rebbe learns it out from Ezrach? V'atani, we learn in a brayso korban mincha. Right, that initial pasuk that we had learned, right? V'nefesh ki sakriv korban mincha. When a person voluntarily brings a flour offering, we said from the extra word korban, it teaches that you can even donate oil offerings. Mechama, and how much do you have to offer? Shlosha logan, 3 logs. Who is the one who says 3 logs? Rebbe says 3 logs. V'kamai mi korban, and it's being learnt out from the extra word korban in the context of a voluntary flour offering, and therefore clearly Rebbe is learning out from the voluntary flour offerings, and it must be that he says don mina v'uki ba'aso amalei itanya tanya, to which Rav Papa responds, okay, well, if we have such a brisa, so I take it back. He doesn't learn it out from Ezrach. He learns it out from voluntary mincha offerings, and it's about domina v'uki ba'asra for Rebbe. And now we're moving on to the final section of today's daf, how wine donations are offered. It says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel says, Shmuel, Misnadev Yayin, if somebody donates a wine offering to the Beis Hamikdash to be libated, maybe umizalfo al gabe aishim, so it's actually sprinkled onto the fire. The wine offering would be sprinkled onto the fire, according to Shmuel. My time outcome, the puzzle says, V'yayin takriv lanesech, chatzi yayin, ishe, reach nichoach l'Hashem, that wine will be offered for a libation, and it'll be ishe, for the fire. So we see that it is, says Shmuel, it is sprinkled onto the fire. V'aka mechabe, but aren't you going to be extinguishing the fire by dripping wine, by sprinkling wine onto it? Kibur b'mixas losh me kibur. Well, it's just going to be a little bit. I mean, you have a raging fire there, and you're putting a few drops of wine. Okay, maybe a little bit it'll extinguish, but just a little bit. Ini, where am I? So kibur mixas losh me kibur. Ini, is that really true? That a little bit of extinguishing is no big deal? Somebody who takes down a coal from the mizbeach, v'kiba, and extinguishes it, chayav, he's chayav. So apparently, partial extinguishing is a big deal. Teleka ela hai. Well, it's talking about where the coal that he extinguished was the only coal that was there. So it was actually an entire extinguish. Alternatively, kibur b'd mitzvah shiny. Alternatively, when somebody offers a wine donation to the Beis Hamikdash, it's a mitzvah. So yeah, maybe he's extinguishing ever so slightly by sprinkling some wine onto the fire, but in the context of a mitzvah, of a wine donation to the Beis Hamikdash, it's okay. Tashma coming here. The Tana Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Eliezer ben Yaakov, Klape shenosna Torah litrom yochu yichabe v'yisrom. No, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, of course, of Trumas Hadashin, of the first avodah that would be done in the Beis Hamikdash every day, probably mamish, right around what time it is right now. It's 5:05 a.m. Let's see, what time is my Zmanim? It's right now 5:01 a.m. When's Alos HaShachar? Dawn is at 5:13. It's 5:05. Dawn is at 5:13. This must be right around when they would do Trumas Hadeshin. It was right before. Maybe they're doing it right now. Maybe while I'm busy recording Babble on Talmud, Mashiach came and the Beis Hamikdash is here already, and they're mamish doing Trumas Hadeshin right now. They might be doing Trumas Hadeshin right now. Wow. They might be doing Trumas Hadeshin right now. So so the Torah has a mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. So what if the Kohen gets up there and he gets up to the pyre and it's full of glowing coals? So can he extinguish those coals so that he can do Trumas Hadeshin? Omar, because it's got to be ash. Omar lo yichbet, says no, you can't extinguish it. So if even in the context, right? So we have, meaning you wanted to say that in the context of a mitzvah, it's okay to extinguish. Here we have a mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. We're saying lo yichbet, don't extinguish. Shani Yosam efshud Yosef v'noter. Well, it's different because there you could just wait a little bit. Bring out his Gemara, learn a little bit. Maybe stick with Mishnayos. Maybe a nice opportunity to learn Mishnayos. And so you can just wait a little bit. Whereas over here by the one, so by the Trumas Hadeshin we say, even though it's a mitzvah, don't extinguish anything because just wait for it to go out on its own. But by the wine donation, we'll say, it's okay. You could sprinkle it on the fire. Tashma, come in here. Yain kediv Rabbi Akiva lisfalim. That Rabbi Akiva says that when you have a wine offering, it's not sprinkled onto the fire. It's poured into the receptacles at the top of the mizbeach. Shem kediv Rabbi Tarfon leishim. The oil donations going to Rabbi Tarfon would go on the fire. V'od, and more so, Tani, we learn in the Brisa, Yain lanesech lisfalim. that the wine for the donations, for the libations, is poured into the receptacles, not into the fire. Oh, maybe it is burnt on the fire. Amar lo yichbe, it says don't extinguish. Lo kash, it's no problem. Har Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, interesting. Okay, this gets into machlokas between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon from Masechta Shabbos that we learned ages and ages and ages ago. That Reb Yehuda says davar she'enu miskaven is osur. Reb Shimon says davar she'enu miskaven is mutter, and therefore he's not intending to extinguish the fire at all. So Reb Yehuda says nonetheless it's osur. Reb Shimon says it's mutter. So therefore, when Shmuel says you could sprinkle the wine onto the fire, it's like Reb Shimon, who says davar she'enu miskaven is mutter. Remember the Shmuel Reb Shimon Sruli. Does that mean that Shmuel holds like Reb Shimon? But Va'omer Shmuel says Shmuel mechaben gacheles shamateches b'rishus rabim b'shvil shlo yizoku bo rabim. If it's Shabbos and a coal of oil, a coal of metal, some very glowing hot metal, it gets into rishus rabim. So you can extinguish that in the interest of the people, because it's not a real coal. Let's go by for a second. But if it was a coal of fire, he would not be able to put it out, because there you have to be concerned about making it into charcoal, right? By extinguishing, I guess, embers of wood, you can make charcoal. And that would be in Isser Midaraisa. So by if we're talking about metal, by extinguishing metal, you're not going to make charcoal, and therefore it's only also Midarabanan. In the interest of nobody getting hurt, in Rishus Harabim, you could extinguish it on Shabbos. But if we're talking about wood, where there's a concern about making charcoal, so you can't extinguish it on Shabbos, even in Rishus Harabim. This is the opinion of Shmuel. Now the thing is, now if, however, you say that Shmuel holds like Reb Shimon, then he should be able to extinguish even a ember of wood. How come? Well, this relates to another machlokas, right? Another concept from Masechta Shabbos, which is melacha she'eina tzricha legufa, a melacha that's being done that you really don't need it. For example, one example is taking out a mace out of a house just because you don't want the mace in the house, right? Not because you want to carry it in Rishus Harabim or anything. So here also you're extinguishing the ember just so nobody should get hurt. You have no interest in making a coal. So Reb Shimon would say melacha she'eina tzricha legufa is mutter, and yet Shmuel is saying don't extinguish coals, even in the embers, even in the wooden embers, when it's in the interest of helping people in Rishus Harabim so nobody gets hurt. And according to Reb Shimon, that would be okay because it's melacha she'eina tzricha legufa, and yet Shmuel is saying it's also. So it sounds like he doesn't know. Like Reb Shimon answers the Gemara, but Davar she'eina miskaven sovel Reb Shimon, but melacha she'eina tzricha legufa sovel Reb Yehuda. Then when it comes to Davar she'eina miskaven, he holds like Reb Shimon, and therefore Shmuel would say that the wine libation is sprinkled onto the fire, and even though it might extinguish the fire a little bit, davar she'eina miskaven, it's mutter. However, in terms of that ember of wood in Rishus Harabim, there he holds therefore he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that melacha she'eina tzricha legufa is aser. Drink a stick of water and we'll wrap up over here. Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, nesachim shenitmu, libations that became tamei, also then ma'arocha b'fnei atzman, you make their own pyre in the azara v'sorfan and burn them there on their own pyre in the azara on the floor. Mishum shenemar, as the pasuk says, ba'kodesh ba'is tisar, if you burn it in the kodesh tan namiyachu, also in a price like this, adam ba'shemen va'menachis, blood, oil, menachis, nesachim, wine libation shenitmu that became tamei osaloin ma'arachah b'fnei atzman, you make their own pyre in the azar v'sorfan and burn them there. Amar Rav Shmuel, so the Shmuel Rav Chonabak that Torah, Aisili be'asar, bring me 10 people ve'emelach kamayu, and I will say to you before them nesachim shenitmu that libations that became tamei, also let my make their own pyre for them and burn them. Hadran Allah, call Tadir, sheesh. Okay, well, that was Daf Tzadi Aleph, Daf 91 of Masechta Zevachim. Sheesh, that was a big Daf. It must have been long, probably hour and 50 minutes, hour and a half. It's a long one. Sheesh. Well, the first part of the first Amr of the Daf was kind of funny. First, we talked about Tadir versus Kadosh, which comes first, but we didn't succeed to actually find a scenario where you would purely have Kadosh versus Tadir. We then said, okay, what happens when Tadir is out of order? Right? Tadir v'shenu Tadir, Tadir kodem. What if you didn't do it? Right? Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you did Rosh Chodesh first. Do you pause it and get back to it? Do you finish it since you started? Again, we couldn't really find a solution there. We then moved on to oil, different types of libation donations. So oil donations, Reb Shimon says no oil donations. Reb Tarfon says yes, oil donations. How are oil donations offered? Reb Zera and Shmuel say a kometz is burnt and the leftovers go to the priests. Abaye says it is the oil donation is entirely burnt on the Mizbeach, which we then actually tied into a machlokas between Rebbe and Tanna Kama. That the Tanna Kama says that a kometz is burnt on the Mizbeach, and Rebbe says that it is entirely burnt on the Mizbeach, which also got into the next topic of how much oil to donate. The Tanna Kama, the Chacham said 1 log, whereas Rebbe says 3 logs. And finally, how wine donations are offered. Rabbi Kiva says they are entirely poured into the sfalim, which are these receptacles at the top of the mizbeach. So it was interesting. Shmuel says that it's sprinkled onto the fire. We didn't see that Reb Shimon said it explicitly. I mean, Shmuel's in Amora, which is interesting that seems like he's arguing with Rabbi Kiva somehow. We're saying, well, I don't know if he's relying on Reb Shimon, or maybe Reb Shimon agrees with this. I don't know. We didn't see explicitly that Reb Shimon agrees with this, but that Darshan was kaven is mutter, and therefore says Shmuel that you sprinkle the wine onto the mizbeach. Chaver, I hope you enjoyed Daf Tzadi Aleph of Masechta Zevachim. I have a Tanya Chavusa in a half an hour. Who knows? Maybe I'll get about 15 minutes of sleep. That would be nice.